Well, last Monday on March the 2nd, the ABC's Four Corners did an investigation into the whole issue of transgender young people and their journeys through transitioning or to being what they call non-binary. Now, this was 45 minutes of positive affirmation of the idea that gender is fluid, that children should be affirmed in this if they are feeling confused about whether or not they are a boy or a girl. And Four Corners followed the journeys of three young people: Olivia, aged 11, Audrey, aged 14, and Riley, who's 23. It was very confronting viewing because all of these young people have felt deep discomfort with their biological gender and have sought to deal with that discomfort by changing their gender or seeking to try and change the gender, or by living in a sort of an ambiguous way, as in the case of Audrey is. It was very confronting to see Riley, particularly a 23-year-old biological female, so a woman essentially, who has had what the transgender activists call top surgery. That's a euphemism for having a double mastectomy, so she has had her breasts cut off. She was filmed on Four Corners shaving, so she is obviously taking testosterone so that she can grow facial hair. And Riley looked into the camera and said this: "I ask, what does it matter to you if I don't identify as a boy or a girl?" Now, on one hand, I guess it doesn't matter a lot what Riley wants to do with her own body. If Riley wants to be a man and identify as a man and live like that, and have us call her address her with male pronouns, etc., and all that goes with that. But I guess the problem with all this is that it doesn't just stop with the individual. This has become a big public policy issue because the taxpayer is now having to fund youth gender clinics. We have an epidemic of young people, particularly girls, that are uncomfortable with their biological sex and are turning up at these youth gender clinics around the nation. The biggest one is at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, where a secretive psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Michelle Telfer is the head there. She won't answer questions, which the Australians, Bernard Lane, really the only journalist in the country who's doing any investigation into this, asks her. And so this is happening, and these young people are turning up and getting treatment. The Four Corners program also profiled a young girl by the name of Olivia, who's 11 years old, and with the support of her parents has started taking puberty blockers to suppress her development so that she won't grow breasts. Often young people, particularly girls who are having dysphoria or discomfort about their gender, feel disturbed as they start to develop physically, and so puberty blockers allow them to delay that for a number of years. What wasn't talked about in the Four Corners program were the side effects of puberty blockers. There was a brief mention to potential impacts on bone density, but the doctor at the clinic in Adelaide where Olivia was being treated said, "Look, we can manage that, nothing to worry about here." But there was no discussion of the effects of puberty blockers on the limbic system of the brain, which some studies show. Many feel that puberty blockers are not reversible or fully reversible. There was no discussion about cross-sex hormones and the fact that they cause infertility. And of course there was no discussion about the consequences of irreversible surgery, such as what Riley has had. So it was a very one-sided report, and I found myself watching this feeling very disturbed, obviously feeling compassion for the three young people, for Olivia, Audrey and Riley, and the disappointment, I suppose, that they were not in a position in life where they could love their biological bodies and to be comfortable with that, and felt that they had to go on national television and share their journeys. A courageous thing to do, no doubt, but none of the discussion of the downside occurred in this. Now, Four Corners, has a reputation over decades in this nation for hard-hitting investigative journalism. Not one difficult question was asked of the doctor from Adelaide. No counterpoints were put to the young people about potential consequences. It was all favourable, all one way. Now, Bernard Lane, who I mentioned before, has been taking up this issue in the Australian newspaper. If you don't subscribe to the Australian, you should, and you should be reading what Bernard is saying, because there's pretty much no other journalist in the country, apart from a few on Sky News After Dark, which the left like to pillory, that's taking this up. Now Bernard has done an interview this week with a US physician by the name of Dr. William Malone. And he's from an organisation called the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. Now that says it all, I think. There's obviously an imputation in that. And what Dr. Malone has told Bernard Lane this week is that, quote, "We want to find the best treatments for these young people, and we believe the answer should be found through scientific study, investigation and open debate." He said, even among endocrinologists and mental health professionals, let alone the rest of the medical community, I think there is a great lack of knowledge about what's occurring in these youth gender clinics. Now, Bernard Lane went on to write in the same story. He said endocrinologists administer transgender hormonal drugs, while psychiatrists typically diagnose gender dysphoria or distress with one's biological sex. But those working in the gender clinics are a very small subset of the profession. And of course, Dr. Michelle Telfer at the Youth Gender Clinic at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne is not an endocrinologist. Now, maybe she consults with those. But I guess the picture that's emerging and the debate that's occurring around the world, and the pushback that's starting to come on the so-called affirmation model, where young people's confusion and dysphoria about their gender is taken at face value, and the only treatment that's offered is affirmation, that is starting to come under question by people like Dr. Malone. And what we do know is that many of these young people that have suddenly started reporting to these gender clinics come with pre-existing mental health problems such as autism, suppressed same-sex attraction, a history of child sexual abuse or family trauma. And there's debate about whether or not they're getting the right treatment for the deep discomfort they feel with their biological sex. Dr. Malone said the affirmative model essentially excludes investigation of underlying issues that may be causing sex confusion or gender dysphoria. Now, of course, this is what the LGBTIQA+ activists believe, that affirmation is the only way, that it's bigotry to try and encourage a young person to watch and wait, which was the way this was always treated historically. It was an extremely rare phenomenon up until about 5 or 10 years ago. Watch and wait was the way that the medical profession dealt with young people so that they didn't rush into any life-altering decisions. And of course, the research shows that 80 to 90% of young people, if taken on a watch and wait path, would come through puberty and then would be comfortable with their biological sex once having come through puberty. But of course, now these gender clinics are getting the kids early. They are affirming them in their confusion, putting them on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and even offering surgery, as Dr. Michelle Telfer wants to do. In fact, she's been asking Daniel Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, for more funding so that she can provide surgery for teenage girls who want to have their breasts removed. I mean, this is shocking and chilling stuff, but this is where this is taking us. And it's very serious right here in Queensland. Just a few metres from where I'm standing right now in the Botanical Gardens is the Queensland Parliament House. Now, the Palaszczuk government there have a bill before the Parliament right now. It's under some innocuous health amendment legislation, but in there is a whole section on what they call gay conversion therapy. And conversion therapy is defined as suppressing someone's sexual or gender identity. Now, suppressing someone's gender identity, according to this legislation, would capture medical health professionals and even counsellors who decline to affirm a child in their gender confusion. So if a health professional or a doctor said to a young person, look, I don't want to put you on a regime of puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, I certainly don't want to recommend surgery, that would be, under this Palaszczuk government bill, suppressing a child's gender identity. Now, the penalty for that in the bill is 18 months in jail. I kid you not. Now, thankfully, there's been some pushback from paediatricians, from lesbian groups, from feminist groups, even the Australian Medical Association, which has been reluctant to ever push back on anything that rainbow political activists have put forward. They have come out against this, and just in the last couple of weeks, the government has said it will go back to the drawing board and have another look at its definition of conversion therapy. But it's still an open question as to where this will land. But it just shows how far this debate has run, that you've got a bill before the Queensland Parliament to jail anyone who would take Dr. Malone's view, who would take the traditional view that a child suffering from confusion about their gender should not be encouraged to do things to their body which might be experimental. So this is a huge problem. I think it was negligent of Four Corners to run 45 minutes without any discussion of the sort of things we've just discussed here on today's video, which you can read about in the Australian newspaper, which other leading Australian paediatricians like Dr. John Whitehall from the University of Western Sydney has been talking about for many years now. This is ideological indoctrination. And I'll just finish with this, because this gender fluid ideology, which is reaping this harvest in our gender clinics, youth gender clinics, is being fed through the school system. Many of you will have heard about the Safe Schools program, which teaches children that their gender is fluid. That's been rebadged in places like Queensland to respectful relationships. And again, here in the Queensland Parliament, just last year, the Child Safety Minister, and think about that in the light of what we've just discussed, has said that respectful relationships is to be compulsory in all Queensland state high schools. Now, respectful relationships has a lot of online material. You can go and Google it. But in the material on one of the websites, there's a quiz for children. And it says, people are born as either male or female, and that is how they should stay, myth or fact. Now, there's only one right answer to that question, and it's not the idea that if you're born with a penis or a vagina, that you're a boy or a girl. This ideology, and we heard it on Four Corners the other night, says that you are assigned your gender at birth. The doctor or the midwife, your mum and dad, whoever fills out the paperwork for your birth certificate, what would they know? Just because they saw a penis doesn't mean you're a boy, or a vagina just because you're a girl. They go and assign your gender at birth. What a great injustice. That's the ideology that's animating programs like Respectful Relationships. That's why kids are being given quizzes like this to plant seeds of doubt in their minds. This is compulsory. Remember, the Child Safety Minister, Di Farmer, got up in the Parliament and announced this last October. So this is serious stuff, folks. If we wonder why our youth gender clinics are overflowing, it's because we are confusing and indoctrinating our children at school. And the ABC, which is paid $1.1 billion per year of your money, doesn't even have the capacity anymore to do proper investigative journalism. This is a shame, and it's an outrage.